Good evening. This is 21st Century Conversations. I'm Shäni. Our conversation this evening is about cancer genetic counseling and testing. My guest is Ellen Matloff. And Ellen, tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm the Director of Cancer Genetic Counseling at Yale Cancer Center, Yale School of Medicine.
I see. And you, the center there, what do you do there? What does the center do?
We see patients who are at increased risk to develop cancer based on a personal or a family history of cancer, or patients who've already had cancer and may be at risk for a hereditary form of the disease.
Oh, I see. Okay, so the goal in us doing this program tonight is to first talk to people about, first I want to talk to you about, is there benefits for genetic screening and testing in terms of cancer? And if so, what are those benefits? How can people utilize them, people who are, who need to get this counseling and testing, and whether in fact there is really an inherent benefit both to those affected and to loved ones, immediate family members. Okay?
Great.
So we want to start by talking about what are the genetic benefits, if there are any benefits, to getting screened for cancer.
There are several benefits. There are benefits for the individual who comes in for the counseling and testing, and as you mentioned, also benefits for other family members. And it's not even just the immediate family members. It's their children, their parents, brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins. So there are benefits.
Now, let's start. I like to sort of pinpoint things to a specific family. So let's say we have family A, and one of the things that's happening today, of course, we see women coming down with cancer younger and with breast cancer younger and younger. And if you have woman A comes in, let's say she's 35 years old, and she has been diagnosed with breast cancer, is she automatically a candidate to come to get screened, and counseled?
She would automatically become a candidate because anyone diagnosed with breast cancer at 45 or younger, just based on their early age of onset alone, would be a candidate for genetic counseling and testing. And it's the same with other forms of cancer. So if we see someone with colorectal cancer at age 50 or younger, they too would be a candidate for counseling and testing, even without a family history of the disease.
Oh, I see. So breast cancer is 45 and colorectal cancer is 50. Is that because most people getting colorectal cancer usually over the age of 50?
Yes.
And getting breast cancer under the age of 45? Over the age of 45?
Yes.
So let's get back to woman A, who is 35 years old. She comes, she's been diagnosed with breast cancer. She comes to get screened to see if she has what? How would you know if it's because of her family history why she has cancer so early?
Well, we take a 4-generation family history. And so we get a lot of information about not only the patient's own history, but about all the family members that we can gather. And I should mention that we do have patients who come in and say, I'm adopted. I don't know anything about my family history, or I know nothing about my dad's side of the family, and that's okay. But when we can, in an ideal situation, we really like to map out 4 generations of the family history. And if we see certain patterns in the family, it helps us to determine how likely it is that the cancer in the family is hereditary.
When you say 4 generations, do you do both on the mother and father side, or is it only the mother?
I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of people have the misconception that breast cancer can only be inherited from the mom's side of the family, and that's completely false. We can inherit a risk for breast cancer from our mother or from our father with equal likelihood. And we can also pass these breast and ovarian cancer genes onto sons and daughters with equal likelihood. They are not sex-linked. So it's very important to get both the mother's history and the father's history.
Now, only about 10% of men are 10% of the breast cancers are in men.
It's much fewer than that.
Oh, it's
yes. So it's a very tiny proportion of breast cancer occurs in men.
But if they can pass on, if parents can pass on the genes equally to men and women, how is it that men get so few breast cancers and women get so many?
Yeah, that's a great question. If a man carries one of these mutations, his greatest risk is probably to develop prostate cancer, not male breast cancer. And so even though both men and women can carry these mutations, their cancer risks are different. And obviously a man is not going to develop ovarian cancer because he doesn't have ovaries.
I see.
And so the greatest cancer risk to male carriers is most likely prostate cancer.
I see. So if someone has the genes, these mutations, those mutations can manifest in prostate cancer as well as in breast cancer, or in case of a man, it wouldn't be ovarian cancer, but they can manifest equally.
And they manifest in different ways. They aren't equal ways. The cancer risks to women who carry a mutation are actually much greater than the cancer risks to a man who carries a mutation. And there are other cancers that we can see, not only prostate and breast and ovary, but we can see male breast cancer, as you mentioned, although it's rare.
Yes.
We can also see cancer of the pancreas. We can see melanoma, all as part of this spectrum.
So all of this you can find out from this testing?
This test lets us know if there's a mutation in one of these genes, and then once we can hone in on that mutation, we know of other associated cancers associated with that mutation.
Wow. Now, okay, so let's get back to woman A. Woman A is diagnosed with breast cancer at age 35. She comes in to be tested. Now, she's one of maybe, let's say, 4 children. She comes in to be tested, and she is found to have, what's the most common gene that is, would that be the BRCA1 and 2, or?
If she has an early onset breast cancer, probably the most common would be BRCA1 or BRCA2.
Okay. Would you then encourage her siblings to all come and get tested?
Well, we would encourage her to come first.
Yes.
And we would first take, as I mentioned, a look at her family history, because although BRCA1 and 2 are the most common genes associated with early onset breast cancer, there are other genes. They just don't receive as much press as BRCA1 and 2.
Yeah, why is that? I wonder, BRCA1 and 2 are very popular. Everybody talk about them. Which other, what are the next 2 notable ones?
Well, the other genes, which are less common, there's one called P53.
P53,
It's associated not only with breast cancer, but with a spectrum of other cancers and families. So, for example, soft tissue sarcomas, lung cancer, brain cancer, bone cancer, adrenal cortical carcinoma.
This P53.
It puts people at risk for all of these cancers. And we often see childhood cancers as part of that spectrum.
Why don't we hear more about this?
Well, it is rare. That's one reason. Another reason really has to do with politics, and that is a single company issued a patent on BRCA1 and 2. So they have a patent, believe it or not, on this genetic testing. They're the only people in the United States who can do the testing. And so they clearly have a financial interest in marketing their test, and they've done so very successfully. So there have been television commercials and radio commercials and print ads about BRCA1 and 2 testing, and that very likely may be why you've heard of that and you haven't heard of some of the other genetic mutations.
So tell me something. When someone comes to your center, to the Yale Cancer Center, and is tested, that test is sent to some place
In Utah.
Where the people who own the patent.
We have to send it to them because it's a patent. all other laboratories in the United States and actually internationally were shut down because of that patent. And so we have to send it to this.
They were shut down?
Well, it's a patent. So yes, lots of other people were doing the testing before this patent was enforced. But after the patent was enforced, they all had to stop offer clinical testing.
And this means that this lab in Utah can charge whatever they want for the results of this testing.
And in fact, the cost of the testing in 1996, if you had had this at an academic laboratory like at Yale,
Yes.
was $1,600. Now,
$1,600?
$1,600. But now, 12 years later, even though the technology has really improved and the cost of the testing has been driven down, the cost of BRCA 1 and 2 testing, if you have everything offered, is $3,800. So yes, that's
For
what a monopoly.
one test?
Well, it's for 2 genes,
Yes,
BRCA
but-
1 and 2. Yes, it's one test. But this is what a monopoly can do.
And what can be done about that, and why isn't anything done since? So in 96, we're looking at 14 years ago, this test cost $1,600 when things were much more expensive in terms of technology and everything. Now with technology, the cost of technology probably cut in half. In
At
that,
least.
And that it's cost $3,800?
Yes.
What happens if someone has no health insurance?
This happens. So we have patients who come in and they either have health insurance, but their health insurance won't pay for the testing because they don't meet the insurance criteria. Or we have people who don't have any health insurance and they can't afford it. And some of these people are turned away and they don't get the testing they need, which is unfortunate. I should say, for people who might be interested in this, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, is
Yes.
suing Myriad Genetics over this patent issue. And I should say I'm a plaintiff in the case.
Good for you.
Although I represent myself, I don't represent Yale University.
Oh, you present yourself
I represent myself.
as an expert in this field.
That's right, and as an individual citizen.
And they're suing, what's the name of the company who owns this patent?
Myriad Genetics.
Myriad Genetics. Okay. And can the average citizen join this lawsuit?
If you go to the website for the ACLU,
Yes.
you can get more information about this action, and you can contact them if you have anything to add to the case.
Well, this is definitely something that the public should know about, because it is unbelievable that in the United States, one company owns the patent on testing for a gene to determine if someone carries an hereditary predisposition to cancer, and that a company can own it.
I
That's
agree.
frightening.
And one thing about it that particularly disturbs me is that there were hundreds of researchers trying to find BRCA 1 and 2 in the 80s and in the 90s.
Yes.
And they were using grants from the NIH. So our tax dollars went to finding these genes. And families donated their DNA. They said, oh, I've got this family history of breast cancer. My family, we're donating our DNA. And now a single patent was issued to one company with research from all of our tax dollars.
Thank you for this information. That
A little
alone is
controversial.
but that alone is worth doing this program, because I just cannot understand why this has been allowed to happen. And how long have they owned this patent?
Since the late 1990s.
So all these researchers were collaborated, and one company decided that they owned it. How did they make that decision? Do you know?
They applied for a patent to the U.S. Patent Office, and in a decision that surprised many people, they were issued this patent.
How reliable is genetic screening and testing?
The actual test itself is a very good test, and we're not talking about just BRCA 1 and 2, but hereditary colon cancer. It's an accurate test. I would say the greatest margin of error for the test has to do with the sample mix-up. So if a patient's sample is labeled correctly and it gets to the laboratory, that's the greatest margin for error, and it's less than 1%.
Okay.
However, the greatest risk is that the test result will be misinterpreted. And unfortunately, this is something that we see again and again and again.
And who is likely to misinterpret the results?
Keep in mind that very few people specialize in cancer genetics. And so this company that we talked about, and other companies, but particularly that company, are encouraging.
Go ahead, yes.
They're encouraging individual physician offices and nurses to do their own testing. And many of these people aren't trained in genetics, and they believe that it's just a simple test like a pregnancy test, that you get a yes or a no answer and that anyone can interpret it. But in fact, genetic testing is extremely complicated. It's not a simple yes or no. And for that reason, many patients have either had the wrong test ordered, or they've had the right test ordered and their test result has been misinterpreted, having devastating effects not only for the patient, but for other family members. And when I say devastating effects, we've had patients who've had parts of their body removed preventatively because they think they're at high risk for a cancer. We've had patients in other families who are told, oh, it's not hereditary in your family. And so they don't have preventative surgery, and some of them have died of cancers that they didn't need to die from. So misinterpreting these test results can be deadly.
And the reason that these places are having the test done themselves is to avoid this $3,800 cost?
Oh, no, they still have to pay the $3,800 cost.
Even if they do the test themselves?
Well, they don't do the test themselves. They do the counseling themselves.
Oh, I see.
They're ordering the test, and then they have to send it out to the same company. But the company goes into their office and encourages them, oh, here are some test kits. You can order this yourself. It's easy to do. We'll walk you through it on the phone. And clearly, you don't get medical advice from the company that has a financial incentive to sell you the test.
Because the company is saving money. If they don't have to do the test and they tell you they're walking you through it and you do the test yourself, but you still have to pay the company.
Well, you don't do they're sending it to Utah, to the company,
yes.
but they're bypassing genetic counseling.
I see.
And one of the reasons to bypass genetic counseling is that sometimes people come to us and they tell us their family history, and we say, you don't need this test. Your risk isn't high enough to warrant testing. But if someone doesn't know enough to counsel the patient in that way, or to say to the patient, you don't need BRCA1 and 2 testing, you need P53 testing, or you need testing for EDCadherin or another gene, then that's not profitable.
The P53 testing can be done by anyone. It doesn't have to go to Utah because no one owns a patent on this.
That's right, currently.
And in fact, this P53 is linked to a broader range of cancers.
It is.
Than the BRCA1 and 2.
Yes.
And it would behoove one to be tested for this if, in fact, a number of different cancers manifest in one's family.
P53 is rare. I don't want people watching this
Yes.
to think that they're at high risk for P53. And it's a spectrum of cancers in the family, oftentimes childhood cancers. We often see patients in a single family who've been diagnosed with multiple cancers over time, particularly in areas of their body that have received radiation. And so there's a pattern, but this is why you go for genetic counseling.
Yes.
Because you want someone to take a look at